welcome to the Douglas County Chamber's WellStar Douglas Executives Unplugged. Luncheon sponsored by AT&T and the City of Douglasville. At this time, I would like to invite my very good friend James Harper to come forward and lead us in our invocation and our pledge.
Good afternoon, friends. Would you stand, please? Let's pray. Lord, I give you thanks for this day, for the beauty of this creation you've given us, for the time to be together, for the food that has nourished us, as well as the conversation and fellowship around these tables. So we come today to reflect on our life together as a body politic and the elections and what has happened since then and what we see looking forward. We just pray that you would bring about a healing and a unity in this nation where we're so divided. We pray for a common sense of loving our neighbor and loving this great nation you've given us. We pray that we would have the humility and wisdom to seek what the prophet Jeremiah says we are to do, which is to seek the welfare and the prosperity of the place in which you've placed us, in which you've called us, for in its prosperity is our prosperity. Lord, may we and all of our elected officials have that vision, and we're just grateful for those who have stepped up to serve, to take the role of being an elected official, but we also ask that we would be just as faithful as individuals to support them and to pray for them and to seek with them what is best for this community. And we pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Put that back up for you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, James. I would like to invite our naming sponsor, Heath King, with the WellStar Douglas Hospital, to come to the stage for remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I could probably just say ditto to all of James's remarks there, which are very good and just a good reminder to us all, I think, as we hear today's session. But my name is Heath King. I'm the president of WellStar Douglas Medical Center. It's a privilege to be here today as we come together not only to recognize the hard work of our local elected officials, but also celebrate the spirit of collaboration that makes our community so special. First, just a sincere thanks to the Chamber for hosting these events that allow us to come together and connect and engage on matters that impact our region. As we do gather here today, we also recognize the outstanding public servants who represented us at the local, county, and state levels. To our elected officials, thank you for your leadership, your commitment, and your tireless efforts on the behalf of the people you serve. You're the ones that help shape our community day in and day out, and we're incredibly grateful for the work you do each day. As James mentioned, and you know, we experienced record turnout in our state, which reflects the engagement and interest in our residents shaping the direction of our future. The results also reaffirm the importance of partnership across the aisle, across sectors, and between community leaders and private organizations. At WellStar Douglas Medical Center, we deeply value these partnerships we've built with local governments, businesses, and civic organizations. Also like to take a moment and just thank and acknowledge the challenges that we face in healthcare, whether it's expanding access, improving quality, or supporting our healthcare workers. We don't do this in isolation. They require continued collaboration with our educational partners, whether it be high school, technical schools, or other four-year institutions, and it creates a vision that's needed from our elected officials, business leaders, and residents all working together. As we look ahead, I am confident with the leadership in this room and the dedication of these elected officials, we will continue to rise to the occasion, tackle the challenges before us, and make our community an even better place to live, work, and thrive. Lastly, thank you again to the Chamber, and be amiss if I didn't say just have a blessed and safe Thanksgiving coming up. At the end of the day, we certainly all have a lot to be thankful for.
Thank you, Heath. And as the superintendent, thank you for your partnership with the Douglas County School System. We will really appreciate that. And now please welcome our gold sponsor, the city manager, Marsha Hampton of the city of Douglasville, and Colleen Martin with AT&T to the stage for remarks in that order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Good afternoon for those on behalf of the city of Douglasville, and I think I have the balance of the majority of our city council here. Our mayor had a previous engagement and she was not able to be here. I'd like to thank you all for attending. Thank you all for continuing to support us and to have this event here at this facility. I will say on behalf of the elected officials, to all who are elected in the room, we thank you for your service. As someone who's worked in local government for over 22 years, I do understand the importance of your role in building communities. Oftentimes I've been asked throughout my career, would you ever serve in elected leadership? And the answer is no. You all have a magic wand that you get to wave over communities and you make it happen, or you make it not happen. And that is a thankless position to be in. I would always prefer to be in the role to make certain that the spark of the wand continues to move throughout your career. So as you go out and you do the business on behalf of the constituency that you serve, I'd like to say thank you for your service, in particular here in Douglasville, Douglas County. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Colin Martin with AT&T. For 145 years, AT&T has connected Georgians to help them live, learn, work, and succeed. Today, we remain committed to doing our part to bring connectivity, educational resources, and economic opportunity to Georgians. We've been deploying fiber in Georgia since the 1980s, and as technology evolves, we're continuing to make substantial investments in wireless and fiber infrastructure to reach more customers with more advanced and faster speed technologies. From 2019 to 2023, AT&T invested nearly $14.9 billion in our wired and wireless networks in Georgia, and we continue to invest in our network infrastructure in communities across the state. With more than 6.7 million fiber optic strand miles in Georgia, AT&T Fiber is now available to more than 1.72 million customer locations in more than 130 Georgia communities, including those here in Douglas County. We appreciate the partnership of elected officials have shown us over the years. We're getting ready to work that partnership again as we open the BEADS portal and begin to get letters of support. So I look forward to talking to you all about that at some point. But just thank you for your service to this community and those of you who serve at the state level. We certainly appreciate it. And thank you for letting us be part of this event today.
And now I would like to take a moment to recognize some of our special guests that are here in attendance with us today. If you are a board member, would you please stand and introduce yourself at this time, board members? We'll start in the back with the ladies. Trent North, Douglas County School System. Next, I would like to take a moment to recognize our diplomats. If you are a diplomat, would you stand and be acknowledged at this time? Thank you. We're also very proud of our 2024 Cornerstone investors that joins us today. I'm sure many of you noticed them on the slides prior to the luncheon, but I do want to say thank you and recognize the group sitting here in the front of the room. Cornerstone investors, would you please stand and introduce yourself as well? We'll start at the left with the ladies. Thank you, Heath. November is our opportunity to thank, and traditionally we've thanked our elected officials with this luncheon. The Chamber appreciates all of our community leaders, and we would like to say thank you. Will our elected officials please stand and introduce yourselves at this time? Elected officials. Okay, let's start at the front table since you all will go sponsors, and we'll start with the ladies.
Thank you to the Chamber, by the way, for always doing this lunch around this time of the year. This is the best lunch that I have because I usually just stay in my office and don't really go. So, big thank you. Cynthia Adams, Douglas County Superior Court.
Leslie McPherson, Mayor Pillarica.
Kimberly James, State House Representative, District 40.
Mark Alvarez, Douglas County Board of Commissioners, District 4, Vice Chair. Brian Fortner, State Court Judge. Eddie Barker, Chief Judge, State Court.
Sonia Comfort, Solicitor General.
Susan Camp, Chief Magistrate Judge.
Delia Racine, District 3.
Whitney Kenner Jones, Douglas County Board of Commissioners for District 2.
Martin Braxton, Board of Commissioners, Douglas County, District 3.
Thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Having held a public office for 25 years, I appreciate and understand your plight. Thank you for continuing to serve when it's not popular. Thank you for allowing people to own your time when they hadn't paid anywhere near the price that it is worth. Thank you for putting up with those financial documents and disclosures that we all love, that we have to file every July and every, I don't know about you, but I would always get nervous, and every December. So thank you all for serving. We wouldn't be the great community that we are today without courageous leaders continuing to fight for what is best for Douglas County, whether it's judicial, whether it's local. We truly appreciate that. We would also like to recognize the elected officials who cannot be in attendance with us today, who work under the Gold Dome or in Washington, D.C. On behalf of the Douglas County Chamber and our business community, we would like to express our gratitude for your dedication and compassion. We are honored to have each of you serve our community, and we are blessed that you carved out time to fellowship with us today. So thank you all. At this time, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Brian Robinson, founder of Robinson Public and host of the Georgia Gang on Fox 5. Brian will share a crucial post-election recap, insights as we look ahead to the 2025 with a new president, along with an outlook into the state's legislative session ahead. Please join me in welcoming Brian to the stage.
Sorry, I move around. I move around way too much to stand behind a podium. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm Brian Robinson. I'm the owner of Robinson Republic. I do public affairs, communications work around the state. Worked on Capitol Hill during the 2000s. I was Governor Deal's communications director throughout his first term and into the second, and then started my own firm. And while I was there, I got to work some with Sanji over here, who was Mayor Reed's communications director at the time. So we were across the street from each other and did a collaboration together. For the last 9 years, I've run my business, but also become a bit of an Metro Atlanta talking head in politics. I'm on the Georgia Gang. I have a show on WABE called Political Breakfast with my friend Theron Johnson, and columnist for Georgia Trend magazine. So none of that makes me an expert on the stuff I'm about to talk about, but I have been doing a bit of a traveling roadshow talking about what's happening in Georgia, because what happens here matters not just to us in our daily lives, it matters to the country and therefore to the world. We are super voters here in Georgia. And I began to wonder this year when there were 7 swing states if maybe we were going to lose our status as super voters. Because, you know, in 2020, we had the smallest percentage margin in the presidential race in the country. I think everyone in the audience knows the margin because it was very famous in a tape recording, 11,780. And so there was no way, fingers crossed, it was going to be that close again this time. And by the grace of God, it wasn't. I don't care. That's not a partisan statement. I don't care which side won. I didn't want that gunshot scope on our backs again like it was in 2020. I happen to be friends with Brad Raffensperger and Gabe Sterling. I worried for their lives if we had another 12,000 vote margin. Thank God we didn't. But bad news and good news is we continue to be super voters. There was a sweep of the 7 swing states, but guess what? We once again were the smallest margin. Of all of those that were pretty tight, our margin at about 120,000 was the closest in the country, meaning that the million text and TV commercials and mail pieces that all of us received over the last 6 months is going to happen again to all of us in 4 years. It's coming, right? And just as we finish up this cycle, we are now, as of last Wednesday, in the 2026 cycle. And despite all of the money being spent in Georgia in 2024, and it was hundreds of millions of dollars targeting you, the super voters, whose voices mean more, your vote means more than it would if you lived 50 miles west of here or 150 miles north of here. We know where those are going to go. Georgia's still up in the air. But besides that presidential, it's a bit of a sleepy election here. You probably all noticed you had very short ballots, right? There was not a ton of stuff. 2026, you're going to have 4 pages of stuff to choose on. We're going to have a new governor. We're going to have a new lieutenant governor, a new attorney general, a new secretary of state, possibly a new agriculture commissioner, possibly a new labor commissioner. I mean, wide open, something that hasn't happened that sweeping in some time. That's going to be a really big deal. And of course, at the top of the ticket, we have Senator John Ossoff, who's State Director Chandra, who's one of the best in the business, is here today. We're so lucky to have her serving the state on behalf of our senior senator. But her life's about to go through the blender as her boss is at the top of the ticket in 2026. So how do we get here to today where we had a race going into the final days of last Tuesday where we weren't completely certain of what was going to happen, despite the fact that it seemed to be pretty decisive on the back end. We even saw a rightward shift in votes in places like California and New York and Illinois, something that's fairly extraordinary. When you look back at starting January the 6th, 2021, there was good reason to believe that Donald Trump's career was over, that there would never be enough Americans who had kind of come back to his side after that traumatic day that was so scary and repulsive for so many people. So how did he do it when Republicans did have legitimate other, potential nominees to choose from? The reason why he got that consolidation behind him again was 2 things. One, a New York City prosecutor who campaigned on convicting Donald Trump took what had traditionally been a misdemeanor paperwork charge and turned it into 30-something felony charges. A wide swath of the country, I'm not saying whether it was or not, but a wide swath of the country saw that as political prosecution, as lawfare, a phrase that we all began to hear a lot. And then there was the raid of his home at Mar-a-Lago. From that point on, no one else had a chance. They had made him a martyr. He consolidated support behind him. And I'm not pulling that out of thin air. We know from polling in 2021, if you polled Republican primary voters, there was about 35% roughly who were always Trumpers. I'm with him no matter what he does. He's my guy next time. Then there was a slightly bigger group, probably 40-something% of the Republican electorate that said, I love him. He was great. It's time for somebody else. We're ready to move on. That ready to move on crew was the plurality of the party. And then the leftovers, probably 15% or less, were never Trumpers. And that percentage of the party is now pretty much gone. That they've been squeezed out, they've left on their own. So that prosecution changed the minds of that plurality. And from that point on, he was going to be the nominee. Of course, Joe Biden had campaigned in 2020 as being somebody who was, going to be a one-term president, somebody who was a bridge to the next generation. At some juncture, he changed his mind. And then at some juncture in June in Atlanta, Americans saw something that made his continued campaign untenable. And they went in to have a process that wasn't a process. It was nomination by conference call. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of finger-pointing, internecine warfare amongst Democrats over who's to blame for this. But here's the deal, and I'm not the person to get into inner Democratic politics, but I'm not sure that anybody they nominated would have won in this particular environment in hindsight. I'm not sure that a mini primary process that would have made it, give it the gloss of a democratic process, I'm not sure would have made a difference. And the idea that the Democrats failed because they didn't knock enough doors or send enough text messages or have enough TV commercials is malarkey. Here's the deal. When you have inflation that any population sees as crushing, as changing their lifestyle, as limiting their lifestyle, that they're making choices in the grocery store, they're not able to buy a new home or buy their first home because of interest rates and a low housing stock, you have this feeling of people not having a chance at the American dream. They're not getting ahead. They're constantly feeling like they're falling behind. And whoever the incumbent party is in that environment is going to lose. Leftist governments in Europe have lost in the last 3 years. Conservative governments in Europe have lost in the last 3 years. Justin Trudeau in Canada, his approval ratings are somewhere in the 20s or 30s right now, and he's on the liberal scale. So, but right or left, it doesn't matter. You're in trouble if you're in charge. And in this particular case, Kamala Harris was part of the team that was in charge, and her hands were tied because she couldn't go out there and say, Bidenomics is working, which she did say, which didn't age well. And I'll say in real time, why in the world would you brand the thing that Americans are most mad about with your name? Why would you do that, right? It's like Brian Robinson's 285 traffic jam. Everybody loves it, right? Why would you do that? And that's what they did. And so she couldn't go out there and say, stop whining. We had 2.9% growth in the economy in the third quarter. What are you talking about, a bad economy? We have below 4% unemployment. Do you know anybody who's unemployed? No. Do you know employers who can't find workers because the economy is so hot? Yes. Probably many of you are out looking actively for qualified workforce. I see it everywhere I go. Despite all of that, she couldn't go out there and make the argument that things are good. She couldn't make the argument that Bidenomics was working and that we needed more of it in the next 4 years to make you feel better about you and your family and your future. When you polled Americans on what mattered to them most in this election, we didn't give them a list, just said, what's your top concern? What was the number one answer? Economy/inflation, cost of living. But they separate them out sometime, but it's one issue, right? Cost of living and the economy. Number two, immigration. That is exactly right. Those were what on the top of voters' minds, and in verbatims, that was what came back. And whatever came below it was far, far below it. When you then ask voters the next question, who do you trust more on the cost of living? Trump had a 10-point lead on that question. Second, who do you trust more to fix the border? Trump had a huge lead on that question. So we were going into the election with the top issues on voters' minds and them telling us by very wide margins they trusted Donald Trump more than Kamala Harris to fix those issues. One thing that the vice president focused on throughout her campaign was the abortion issue. And if I was going to defend that campaign choice, I'd say this. If you poll that issue, who do you trust more, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, to represent your interest on the abortion issue? Most Americans would choose the vice president. So she did. That was an issue where she had a lead over him. People would rather go with her view on that, a majority, over his view on that. The problem with that strategy is that when you go back to that question, what is your top priority? Abortion is somewhere on the list, but it's way down here. Economy and immigration are here. And when you break down what people are saying and that abortion is my top issue, I think Democrats made the mistake of thinking all of those people were pro-choice. Some of those people are evangelicals or Catholics who are pro-life, and it's their top issue for that. So they were pounding that issue, and they were doing it for more than a year, coming to Georgia and doing abortion rights or reproductive, however you want to phrase it, forums and listening sessions and that kind of stuff. And look, I get it, but they seem to make that a much bigger issue than what voters were making that issue. And so I think that's a big part of what went wrong here. One thing that's been very interesting and is very, very important for us as Georgians, I really do believe that Georgia is a microcosm that is very telling for what's going to be coming in the country at large as the country continues to diversify rapidly. Georgia has diversified quicker and before the rest of the country in many ways. We are now a majority minority state. In the 2020 census, it was 50.1% white. So the next day, probably, this was a majority minority state. Our electorate is 51.7% white. So there's no way that Donald Trump got 120,000 margin. There's no way that Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger won by 7 and 8 points in 2022 without building a multiracial coalition. And that is critical to winning in Georgia and having any sort of margin. You've seen Republicans do a lot of investment in Gwinnett and North Fulton, for example, places where there are large Asian American and Latino American populations. Those groups have gone from being 65, 70% Democrat in the past to competitive today, 50-50. We saw Latino men breaking for Trump by a 10-point margin. Biden had won those groups by 25, 30 points in 2020. That's a huge swing. When you look at how the Republicans held or gained control of the House during the Biden administration, it was picking up Latino districts in Florida and Texas. And very interestingly, the second largest voter group in Georgia, obviously, Black Georgians. And around 30% of the population here in the state. And we saw Trump and other Republicans getting a historically large number of Black men, people who are responding to the economic message that was coming from the Republicans. And Democrats are going to have to figure that out as they begin to sort of, as this realignment is continuing, where some of these working class non-white voters are joining working class white voters in this Republican coalition with an economic coalition, people who are open and receptive to the same economic message about protecting high-paying blue-collar jobs here in this country. Democrats are going to have to figure out where they go. Democrats have picked up some of these white college-educated voters, and particularly in metro Atlanta, who have abandoned Republicans during the Trump era because they don't like him, right? You know, are they going to try to expand on that population as the Republicans become more populist? Do the Democrats become more of the free market people? People who don't like tariffs, people who believe in opening markets in foreign shores. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. Because I think that they have to attract more college-educated voters because those are high-propensity voters, and they're liable to turn out. That's an advantage that Democrats have moving forward. But they also have to get off of the college campuses. The woke stuff that has come out of academia was proved to be a huge weight around the neck of the Democrats in this election cycle. And I think you're beginning to see that discussion bubbling up amongst Democrats themselves about taking stands on things that are far outside of the cultural mainstream. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look at what the Trump campaign did. That commercial where they said she's for they, them, it was heavily and directly targeted at Black men as well as white women. White women, because they don't want their daughters in playing sports with biological males, and Black men who are conservative, by and large, on those issues. You saw Charlemagne the God, a very prominent Black podcaster, discussing that in one of the Trump commercials, a very direct appeal to those voters in a way that you haven't seen Republicans do in the past. And I was speaking to a group of hospital executives yesterday, and one of the questions was about, the result of the defection of Black men toward Republicans. And I went into what I said about the Latinos and Asian Americans too. I said, look, this is good for every group here, every group in the state. if no party can take you for granted, if no party can put you in a bucket and go, oh, you are a black 35-year-old woman, ergo you are a Democrat. You are a 65-year-old evangelical white guy in the deep South, ergo you are a Republican. If they got to go out and fight for your votes every time, you're going to keep them on their toes. You're going to keep your interest at the forefront of what they're talking about, because they have to come talk to you. They have to come to your community. I think we win across the board. And I think breaking out, this is just my personal opinion, I think breaking out of this racial coding of how we vote is probably very good for the state and very good for the country. That we're no longer going to be identified just by group. We're going to be identified by our interests. We're going to be identified by our ideology and our ideas. I think that's great progress and something that's very necessary. Because here in Georgia, one thing that we've seen traditionally is, in order for Democrats to win statewide, we had a formula, the 30-30 rule. And it really only applied to Georgia because that has to do with the specifics of our population and our numbers. Democrats had to get at least they needed the electorate to be at least 30% black, which reflects their level in the population here, and they needed at least 30% of white voters to vote Democrat. And quite often, they hit the 30% mark. When Obama won in 2008, it was above, probably closer to 33%, a historic turnout because of the excitement around that candidacy. Where they failed was getting the 30% of white voters. When my old boss, Nathan Deal, was reelected in 2014, we probably got close to 80% of the white vote in that election. And the reason why Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff in office, they probably hit that mark with white voters and exceeded it in their elections. That's going to begin to, that rule is going to break down as people begin to vote differently according to, it's not just going to be on like where they live and what their race is. It's going to be voting on economic issues, cultural issues, et cetera. So I know this week Republicans are celebrating. I hear it everywhere I go. Obviously I have Republican background, so that's kind of my social network as much as anything. My Democrat friends, I do have a lot of those. I see them with a lot of angst and, how are we going to figure this out and move forward? But look, the ball's now in Donald Trump's court. And as we look forward here in Georgia to 2026, I think Georgia very well could begin to get in the pattern that the state of Virginia has always been in. So in 2025, Virginia will have a governor's election. So obviously, they always have a governor's election the year after the presidential. And so it's closely tied to what happened that year before. And even though it's a pretty blue state, whichever party wins the White House wins, the opposite party wins the governorship in Virginia. And this goes back 20, 30 years. I don't know there's even any exceptions. Biden won Virginia by a huge margin. A year later, Republican Glenn Youngkin becomes the governor by a fairly big margin. So a lot of people who voted for Biden voted for Youngkin. We could very well see the same thing. And so, I have a positive message for Georgia Democrats here. There will be a backlash to Trump to some degree. Now, maybe the economy is just going to be fantastic. Everybody's going to be thrilled, and the administration is going to be competent, and there's going to be no chaos. Everything's going to be wonderful, and it's going to be a net positive that Trump's at the top, that Trump is the president in the White House. There's a good chance that none of that's the case, right? And so the Republicans will be running potentially in an atmosphere where there's going to be a backlash to Trump, a backlash to Washington. Republicans benefited from the backlash to Washington this year. They could be the victims of it in 2026. So the Democrats have got a lot of figuring out to do, because they've got to be able to get in a room and pick candidates who can win the governorship and who can help support John Ossoff at the top of the ticket, because there's really no one else who's going to be providing coattails the way that we had last Tuesday, where we had this huge turnout because of the presidential. And I also want to say congratulations to all of you as Georgia voters, because you broke records again. We had 5.2 million of us turn out of about 7 million registered voters. That is absolutely fantastic. We had some counties, Oconee County was the winner. They get the gold, 86% turnout. That's absolutely extraordinary. And every year we continue to break these records. So that is something we could all be proud of. We're participating. And one cool thing about us being a swing state, I know it sucks to get all this stuff. You know, I know. I hate it too. I just want to watch the Falcons in peace and not have to see they, them, and all that stuff. And my daughter asking me weird questions I can't really answer because she's 8. And, you know, one day we were watching. She's 8. She's coming to political consciousness, and so we're sitting on the couch, and she goes, "Dad, what does unfit for office mean?" That's the level of toxicity that we see in our politics, but it has the benefit to us all is that it has driven turnout. No one can say that they're not informed in some way because it's being served up to you right in front of your nose, right? So the great news is we're engaged. Georgia matters. We're going to matter again in 2028 to a huge degree. Everyone's going to be interested in what happens here. You may get man-on-the-street interviews from the British Broadcasting Company or Al Jazeera. I mean, French television. They've all been here, camped out over the last month. I think I'm somewhat famous in Europe now from all the European TV I've done. So that's going to continue here for the given future. And I'll be honest, I didn't see it coming. I was wrong. I really did believe what my Democrat friends were telling me, that because of the demography of Georgia, because we're now a majority-minority state, I really figured by the mid-2020s, this would be a pretty solidly Democratic state. And when Biden won by 12,000 votes, I thought that was the tipping point. And I thought that because if you look back, Nathan Deal won in 2010 by 250,000 votes, but then only by 200 in 2014. Fast forward, Brian Kemp wins by 55,000. Fast forward, 11,780. I mean, do you see a pattern? It's pretty easy to see, right? And so at some juncture, the bar graph just becomes overwhelming. Well, the bar graph got bent in 2022 with Brian Kemp's very strong victory in that race. But look, the demography still does help Democrats to some degree. Both parties have now but nobody can take it for granted. Republicans can't take for granted 80% of the white vote. Democrats can't take for granted 90% of the black vote. Everybody's got to come out and fight for your vote. That's a good place for us all to be, and that's going to make 2026 in Georgia one hell of a fun ride for all of us if you love politics. And I will go to Q&A, but I also want to stop and say to all of you, a lot of local elected officials here, I am somebody who's always been an advisor, staffer, or whatever. I know how hard running for office is. I know how stressful it is for families, particularly spouses. And I know how thankless many of these tasks can be. When people come to me and they're like, one day I want to run for Congress, what should I do? And I'd be like, well, don't run for city council because you're just going to piss off people, right? Because when you are a local elected official, you have to make real decisions. And what I tell them is this: if you care about your community and you want to make a difference in your community, be on the city council, be on the county commission, be a mayor. You can change the trajectory of your community for the better. If you have a vision, you can implement it, you will make a difference. And no one will ever know you did it or appreciate you, right? But if that's what matters to you, do it. So to all of you, do it. Thank you for what you do. And with that, I'll take any questions anybody may have. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Quick question for you. If you have any opinions, thoughts on the Gen Z voting bloc.
Yeah.
I know that some were able to vote this last election, but I have never seen kind of the civic engagement via social media and all the other outlets, the conversations teenagers are having about the upcoming elections. So any thoughts on that upcoming bloc?
Yeah, traditionally, take out the word Gen Z and make it 18 to 29-year-olds, because I was once one of those, and I'm Gen X. That group traditionally has been fairly liberal, and we see people kind of become more conservative as they get older. Trump did extraordinarily well with Gen Z, and I think, and that's interesting, because Gen Z is extraordinarily more diverse than Gen X, and even more so than the baby boomers, right? So for a Republican to do well with that age group, when one, it's racially diverse, two, that group throughout the ages has been more liberal, is extraordinary. But look at why, right? They're coming out as with angst. Those who have college degrees have the highest college debt of any generation in American history. Those coming out have the biggest hurdles to buying their first home because of interest rates, because of low housing stock. They also are coming out of college with $0, maybe even with debt, facing a time of hugely rising costs. So you can see why they want to change, right? It's going to be really hard to really get them what they want, but to make a difference there. But I think that's what's happening. But it's good to see that group is politically competitive for both parties, because they're about 3 cycles away from being kind of in the ages where people start running for elected office, and they'll be hugely important. And I tell my daughter and I tell my Gen Z friends, I was like, we're leaving y'all $33 trillion in debt. Good luck. Hope you have some ideas.
Can I just say it out loud?
Yeah.
Substitute teachers. Okay, thank you. There's been some push sometime from the parties to want to make local races partisan, and I love the fact that we aren't, because it seems to me, as a former city council person who's also mayor, most of what we handle has nothing to do with partisanship. And we can cross those lines on both sides, and I like that factor. So do you have an opinion on, county commission seats, council, school board, even school board, they talk about it? Sheriff,
too. I totally agree 100%. It's silly, and particularly when you live in and I don't know, forgive me, I don't know the breakdown in Douglas County, but I live in a county where Harris probably got 83 to 85% of the vote, right? So overwhelmingly Democrat, no Republican elected officials really in the entire county at this juncture. Maybe on city councils, but those are nonpartisan. But like for the most important race in our county, sheriff and the CEO, which is our county commission chair's equivalent, I didn't get a vote in the Republican primary. Right, there was no candidate for those offices in my county, and then I go to the general and there's one person's name on there. So to some degree, I have been disenfranchised in DeKalb County. And if you're a Democrat living in an 80% Republican county, if you're a Democrat in Jackson County, or north of here in Bartow or Gordon County, you're disenfranchised. So yes, I believe that letting that minority party voice, whoever it is, elect these countywide and citywide officials, I think it helps moderate to some degree the candidates that we get through the process. Because the last thing that I think we need for a local office, what our primary system emphasizes and rewards ideological polarization, right? So you're talking to, on the Republican Party side, an electorate far to the right of Georgia's general election electorate, and on the Democrat side, far to the left of the general population in the state. And so what do you do to get those votes? You have to go be the most reactionary or most radical candidate that you can possibly be to get through those primaries. And we don't need that in city government, right? We don't need ideological battles. We need people to make sure our sewer is up to date, right? That's what I care about. I want my trash picked up, for goodness sake. I don't care whether or not you believe in small government or big government. Just pick up my damn trash, right? Is that right? I'm sorry, Mickey.
Hello. You had mentioned you have an 8-year-old daughter who's a part of the Alpha generation. I have.
Is that what they're called?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I have several Alpha generational children myself. Being a millennial coming in, what advice would you give to the school district around election and voting? Because it's great that people are voting, but are they educated votes? From my experience understanding the Gen Z, they're just checking off a block. They very rarely understand or know who they're voting for. Either it's whoever their parents voted for or you know, their generational vote, that I would call it. What education resources would you provide to the schools in order to educate that alpha generation who will eventually be there, and the Gen Z generation who's going to be running very soon for these?
Yeah. God, this is such a huge issue in our culture today. And when you know, we have the question back here about Gen Z, you're mentioning generations. A lot of the Gen Z voters get all of their information, I wouldn't call it news, they get their information and viewpoints from TikTok. And I'm not savvy enough to know how that works. I do not know what they're consuming. It scares me to some degree about what they may be consuming. And I don't think we know. But not to sound, I'm gonna make myself sound old as Moses, but when I grew up, we had newspapers, right? And those have gone away largely. But they, you know, when I was an intern at the state capitol in 1996, like every city, the little mid-sized cities outside of Atlanta, Albany, Macon, Columbus, Augusta, Savannah, Dalton, Gainesville, all had their own person who covered the General Assembly and covered their local delegation and covered what was happening. And everybody, at least I guess the elites of the community at least, you know, read that, and they knew who represented them. They knew their names, and they knew maybe some pet issue they were working on because it was served up to us. Now that simply doesn't exist. I mean, the media room at the state capitol is largely empty. Like Sanji is a former state house reporter there. Even back then, it was way bigger, more vibrant than it is today. So we're no longer getting fed real information about what's happening in the elections that really matter. It's really hard to get it. Everything now is through some sort of ideological delivery system. You know, you've seen a conservative backlash to what they perceive as a mainstream liberal bias. Well, the mainstream media, that's for them. And so we're going to create our own thing. And there's really, on this side, and I get it, it makes sense. The problem is, on this side, and I hope this changes over time as it matures, there is no journalistic ethics to it, right? It's a business model intended to outrage, because outrage gets clicks. Outrage keeps you engaged, it keeps you scrolling. And so you're going to see stuff that's not really representative of reality. It's stuff that's just going to make you mad. That's a really dangerous place for us to be. And I'd imagine that's a lot of what Gen Z is getting fed, is that sort of business model driven tidbits. Civics education is what I want to see in schools. I'll tell you that if schools get too far into some of it, they're going to face a backlash. Conservatives are highly on guard about what is taught to their children in schools post-COVID. It was a breaking point, and I think we have to kind of get past that before schools wade too deeply. But let's talk about the levels of government, separation of powers, the importance of voting, the importance of civic engagement. I think that's the role of schools. Well, I think I've taken enough of your time. Thank you all so much for having me here today. It's been great to be with you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Brian, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. As a thank you for speaking, a contribution will be made in your name to the Chamber's Board Scholarship, which funds a scholarship for a graduating high school senior in Douglas County each year. So congratulations. So thank you. At this time, I'm going to have the City of Douglasville and Wellstar to provide the door prizes. If Marcia and Paul, yes, if y'all will come up and draw the prizes. How did I do? Uh, 4082. 4082. Going once, going twice, gone. 4107. 4107. Going once, All right, Mayor of Villa Rica, congratulations. I'm gonna give you a Douglasville bag. 4097. Ah, she's in the back. Perfect. Congrats. If you'll walk this way down, please. 4108. Whoever came in close to you. 4108. 4066. In the back, the DA. You got to report this. Gotcha. 4106. You sure? Sorry. Thank you. 4098. Ah. Just a couple of quick announcements. I'm not done. You got 3 more? Got you. Thank you. 4083. You sure it's a good one? Okay. Okay. All right, let's try this one again. 4080. Ah, there you go. And then the last gift. 2 more. 4094. Ah, she's in the back. Congratulations. All right, 1 more. 4070. 4, Congratulations to everyone. Just a couple of quick announcements. We invite you to convene with the top players across our business community to celebrate what makes Douglas shine at our Douglas Chamber annual meeting on December the 10th. Join me as I highlight our 2024 accomplishments and the 2025 DC Board Chair, Trevor Quander, Area Manager of Georgia Power, as he shares his plans and aspirations for 2025. Also, to the Douglas County Young Professionals, a DCYP, an acronym for everything, what the heck, is now accepting applications for their Emerging Leaders Awards. Awards categories are Community Service, Excellence Award, Rising Star Award, Entrepreneurial Spirit Award, and Advocacy and Leadership Award. The deadline to apply is November 22nd. See the Chamber website for detail. Thanks again to the City of Douglasville, to AT&T for sponsoring today's luncheon, and for Wellstar Douglas Hospital for their continued support. Thanks again to all the elected officials. We know you're busy and you barely get a lunch break, so thank you for partnering with us today. And then thank you for the Chamber's Government Committee, who has coordinated all the efforts for tonight. And thank you, Brian. I didn't want to answer the question about school and government, so you did a phenomenal job. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.